Emmanuel Acho is the analyst who infamously called Justin Herbert a, quote, social media quarterback, essentially saying that he's not a winner and a lot of other standard bullshit. And it caused a bit of a firestorm, rightfully so, because it makes no sense. But what Emmanuel Acho has now cornered the market doing is he has a show called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And he's a part of this kind of crossover between, I think, conservative media, and he probably would not identify his show as a conservative show. I think it is. And sports media. We just on the Majority Report played a clip of Jason Whitlock, who went from sports media to The Blaze and is now on Tucker Carlson, essentially apologizing for cops and running cover for them, murdering Tyree Nichols. He said it was egregious, but that it was really just a distraction from Ukraine. So just Tucker Carlson talking points. And that transition has happened quite quickly. There are more sports figures who are going to make this move. My guess is that Emmanuel Acho will be the next to go to, say, somewhere like the Daily Wire. Because you'll see this in this conversation with Van Lathan and Rachel Lindsay on Higher Learning, which I believe is a podcast with The Ringer, that they had this, and I watched the whole thing. I'd highly recommend it. And when we clip this, we'll put a link to that full interview in the description. Van confronts Emmanuel Acho in no uncertain terms. He does not mince words about the premise of Emmanuel Acho's show, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, which are not really that uncomfortable. He'll have guys on like NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell and essentially take what he has to say at face value about things like Colin Kaepernick and systemic racism. It's not that uncomfortable. People don't leave conversations, white people, where, I mean, that's supposed to be what the show was about, confronting racism, don't leave conversations with Emmanuel Acho feeling uncomfortable. But Emmanuel was certainly uncomfortable in this interview. Here's just a part of it that was clipped by Van on Twitter.
Oh, when white people say, well, racism doesn't exist, I know why they say that. Because I've been in them rooms when they saying that. Mm-hmm. When I kick it with black people and they're like, all white people are racist. I know why you're saying that. All the while, I have the privilege and luxury of not having generational trauma because my parents were born in Nigeria. So, man, my method is removing some of the sting because I don't have that sting and trying to deliver a message in a manner that people can receive it.
Okay. Let me tell you why what you just said offends me.
Okay.
All right. You saying that you don't have generational trauma and you didn't mean it this way, but the reason, and it's, I have to name it, you saying that you don't have any generational trauma in some way meaning, or that in some way meaning that your delivery method to white people is going to be either more effective or more sanitized is, to me, dangerous. And let me tell you why. Everybody that you just named and what you're talking about does what they do in different ways. I don't think that any of the things that they do are necessarily harmful. But what I could say is a black man, a prominent one, acting as an emotional butler for white people and serving them the most milquetoast, unspicy, unseasoned brand of racial discourse and accountability possible could definitely be harmful. Like, we're fighting for our lives. And to me, having a conversation like that at that particular time, it's not that it's a different method. Everybody has a different method. Is that it's the wrong method, is that it gives cover for.
So that's just a part of the interview, and I don't want to play too much more because I really want to direct people to it. Because that's actually one Van goes even harder later, and I appreciate that. And look, I'm a white lady, right? So I'm just commenting on this from my own perspective, and as someone who's a progressive and wants sports spaces and media spaces to be anti-racist. It was cathartic to watch because, first of all, let's just say Emmanuel Acho saying that because he's a Nigerian American, that he does not have generational trauma touched by racism, and that can be his perspective. That's okay in a vacuum, but he's a media figure and he's espousing these ideas to his audience. Nigeria colonized.
Yeah, like
Nigerians speak English because
they were colonized.
Of colonization.
So it was a colony in Africa.
There's
a British colony.
a lot of generational trauma in Africa. So
it just seems reductive and like frankly a little offensive to people historically and contemporarily who have been victims of and byproducts of and collateral damage of international colonialism to say because I'm Nigerian I basically grew up in a utopia where black people don't have generational trauma, where black people don't suffer the scars of slavery.
He said, I have the privilege and luxury.
I think specifically the second thing he says is like, I can soften the blow of acknowledging that like systemic racism exists beyond like conversationally saying something racist or saying a slur. And which the idea is, and what I think of my biggest issue with Emmanuel Acho has been since he even did the After the Final Rose special for The Bachelor, when there was a big controversy over some racism or allegations of racism in one of the seasons, is that his project seemingly from that moment, from other appearances he's had on Fox to this appearance, is we need to make ideas of racism most palatable to white people.
Exactly.
And we need to make it digestible for white people. And if you don't do that, that is a failure of black people. It is not a failure of white people to acknowledge it themselves or to accept it themselves, that being racist, regardless of whether you are conscious of it or not, is in existence no matter what you do. And he is not willing to say that. He has to say, I am the guy. I am the nicely packaged person to say, hey, white person, racism is not okay.
Yeah.
And Van Lathan, you're a little too abrasive about it, so that doesn't work.
He says he, quote, tries to deliver, I don't want to quote, but he tries to deliver a message in the way that people can receive, is what I remember him saying. And that's exactly what Bradley's trying to say. Like, as white people, I don't want a version of racism that's digestible to other white people. You should be made to feel uncomfortable, and he's branding it as uncomfortability. Then actually imbue your show with some uncomfortability. What Van advocates for on Higher Learning, from everything I've heard from him, what I heard in this interview, that's actually uncomfortable truths, uncomfortable realities. And so when you claim that you are so edgy and all you're doing is essentially seeding, framing, and agreeing with white people and white power players like Roger Goodell, who have been presiding over systemically racist actions, including those towards Colin Kaepernick, Eric Reed, others speaking out against police brutality within the NFL. When that is your branding and that's how you're presenting yourself, you are moving the conversation backwards, because the white people that watch your show say, well, that's uncomfortable, but I felt completely good about the conversation the whole time. So that's what he serves. So when Van says, you're an emotional butler for white people, some white people might hear that and think, that makes me uncomfortable. Well, that's good. That's good. That's the emotional labor that white people have to do. Like, Black people are constantly having to experience emotional labor, and because our entire media ecosystem, including sports media, is geared towards white people. I was just doing like a mini rant on how it seems like every white athlete just gets an endorsement deal after they're done in the NFL. Black guys, no matter how good they are, it's much more of a struggle. You have to be whimsical, like, or quirky, like Marshawn Lynch, and then maybe you'll get some Skittles deals. But Gronk on every ad, Julian Edelman on every ad, right? Like, whiteness is so, our culture is so biased towards whiteness that there should be media sources where white people can have that challenged. And Emmanuel Acho's show pretends it's challenging, but it's actually just making white people feel warm and cozy. And I mean, later in that interview, I said Van goes in even harder. Emmanuel Acho gets defensive and says he's being ambushed, and there's been a controversy about that. But just watch out for him on conservative media. I think he's an up and coming star.
Yeah, if he goes the route of Will Cain and ultimately leaves ESPN, I mean in the Will Cain vein, leaves his post either at Fox Sports and Will Cain's case, it was leaving ESPN to become a full right-wing reactionary on Fox News, being the weekend anchor on Fox and Friends and being the male host on Outnumbered. If Emmanuel Acho reaches that perch, it would be seemingly pretty fitting for him, because then he could rebrand himself from the guy who has uncomfortable conversations with a black man to being the guy who has comfortable conversations with a bunch of white people. Happy trails in the future,
happy trails.
Emmanuel. And come on the show anytime you want.
Oh my God, that would be hilarious.
I promise, as a producer, I will not mislead you.
No, it'll just be about this.